On one level, it's a measure of how irrelevant the uni-party politics in Britain are that the Conservative government had such a bad night on Thursday that the Prime Minister might be overthrown in the coming week. And yet they came within just 1,500 votes of actually being able to declare they'd had a relatively good night. And though the mass media, which is head over heels for the wooden man, Keir Starmer, was more than ready to convince everyone that Labour had had a great night, in fact, the third parties and independents obtained far more gains in the election, far more gains in the election than the official opposition were able to do. Labour has a problem. It has two problems that overlap but are not entirely coterminous. Labour has a Gaza problem. How could it not? For millions of people in Britain, Muslim and non-Muslim, but all Muslims, all except the quislings that profess to be Muslims, but are still in Keir Starmer's genocide Labour Party, and I take this opportunity to ask all of those to judge themselves before they are judged. The time is running out where they can, in any sense, survive politically or in other ways too, and remain inside Keir Starmer's Israel Labour Party. It's really not rocket science. You don't have to be Professor Einstein to work out that you are cooked, you are doomed. Your goose is on the plate at the next time you stand up for an election in Britain if you are a Muslim Labour candidate. But it's not only the Muslims, you see. If you look at any of the demonstrations, protests, petitions, manifestations of public distress at the slaughter in Gaza over the last 7 months, you will find the great majority of the people on these protests, in these petitions, making these boycott decisions are not Muslims at all. So if there's 2.5 million Muslim voters in Britain, there's at least another 2.5 million non-Muslims for whom Gaza is a red line. And voting for genocide parties is not something that they are prepared to do. That makes 5 million. Keir Starmer has to get 13 million people to vote for him if Mrs. Starmer can truly start measuring the curtains in number 10. And I'm here to tell you and her that she should not do that, because the result of the next general election is very far from predetermined. It's very far from that endlessly predicted in rigged public opinion polls over the last couple of years, which show the Labour Party sometimes on 50% of the popular vote. But actually, on the grass where elections are fought, their true position is some 34%. And you don't win elections in Britain on less than 40% of the national vote. That's leaving aside all the local considerations, to which I shall turn in a few minutes, that will complicate that outcome even further. So if there are 5 million people who are in anguish, distress, in grief over the endless slaughter they've watched on their telephones, if not their televisions. I don't watch television, so I've only got second-hand information that virtually nothing I'm watching on my telephone ever appears on television. But as fewer and fewer people watch television news, and more people are watching what's happening on their telephones, it's a safe surmise for me that these 5 million distressed people are not going to be queuing up to vote for a party that has facilitated and enabled that genocide from the very first day. From the day that Keir Starmer said Israel had the right to cut off water, electricity, food, medicine, all supplies in a total, absolute medieval siege since the leader of the Labour Party said that. And what else could he say? Because he had already pledged his troth to Israel years before. Without qualification, he said, I am a Zionist. Without qualification, I will always support Israel. That's what he said long before October the 7th, long before everything that's happened since October the 7th. So what else could he do for entirely internal party political reasons? Starmer pretends to be a rabid supporter of an Israeli government which is scarcely with parallel anywhere in the world, has no peer in its evil, wicked, venality, bloodthirsty, warmongering, up to its neck in the blood of women and children. But Keir Starmer is without qualification on its side, without equivocation on its side. He was already steeped in blood so far that he could not possibly make a decision as to whether it was bloodier to go on or bloodier to go o'er. And he chose to go on until tens of thousands became scores of thousands, became over 100,000, mainly women and children, I repeat, who were either murdered or maimed, injured, wounded, lethally wounded, in a territory which is a cage in which there is not a single functioning hospital in which they could be treated. So this Gaza problem is not going to go away, whether there is a ceasefire or not, whether Netanyahu falls or not, because none of that 5 million people is ever going to forget. Not only that Starmer put this albatross willingly around his own neck, but all of the other leaders of the Labour Party, from the Pat McFaddens to the David Lammys, to all of the top leadership of the Labour Party, over and over again went on the television opposing a ceasefire, even a ceasefire, never mind justice. A ceasefire is not the right solution, they said. Israel has the right to do what it's doing. Starmer now tries to say he misspoke when he gave Israel that green light, but he did not. Emily Thornberry was on television days later defending every word that Keir Starmer said. David Lammy was saying it. David Lammy said it at the dispatch box on Wednesday in front of my eyes, 10 yards away from me, blaming the Palestinians for the fact that there was no ceasefire. That will never be forgotten. Maybe at the edges, maybe it will be deprioritized by 1,000, 10,000, 20,000, 50,000 people. But for millions, it will never, ever be forgotten. And any Labour candidate dripping in blood, expecting votes from these people, is going to be sorely disappointed. So Labour has a Gaza problem which will not go away. But it also has a Starmer problem. I identified Starmer on this show right on the first day that this man is so wooden, I have seen birds attempting to nest in him. This man is clunky, infelicitous. He's absolutely incapable of speaking in a way that would in any way excite or move anybody. Nobody moves for Starmer out of love, only out of interest, only if they're one of the 20 or so broadcast journalists who are hoping to be inside number 10 as the next Alistair Campbell. They're competing for that job. None of them are moving because they're inspired by Keir Starmer. He has the charisma of a dead fish. In fact, he reminds me constantly of a fishmonger slab. His mouth open, but nothing coming out. This Starmer is incapable of even facing couch potato breakfast BBC television commentators, auto cue dollies, and the women are no better. Bowling softballs at him, he can't even do it. He's the worst performing leader of an opposition that anybody has ever seen that is involved or interested in British political history. And the election campaign hasn't even started yet. He's not even had to face a debate on television yet. He's never had to be questioned rigorously as the law requires. In electoral law, you're not allowed to bowl softballs at one guy and hard balls at the other. You'll be breaking the law if you do that. Starmer will be lucky to survive at all and will definitely not survive unscathed the rigors of a British general election campaign, not least because he'll have me on his heels at the head of a list of many hundreds, perhaps 500 candidates up and down the land, and I'll be demanding that I'm in the leaders' debates. We are already demanding that we are on the opinion polls. After all, Richard Weiss, the head of the Conform Party, he's in every opinion poll. He's never off the television. And we've got 4 times the number of elected council representatives that he does, and 100% more elected members of parliament that he does. On 100th of his budget and 1,000th of his television exposure. So we'll be there. We'll be chasing Keir Starmer. And when he's faced, as he was by me in Rochdale, as he was by one of our guests this evening, Ahmed Yaqub, the world-famous barrister, who in a campaign less than 5 weeks gained 70,000 votes and almost made Keir Starmer lose the West Midlands mayoralty, which in other circumstances with any other leader would have fallen into Labour's lap without anyone expressing an ounce of anxiety about the outcome. And Ahmed Yaqub's 70,000 votes came from the young people across a band of 7, 8, 10, maybe more parliamentary constituencies where we will be standing with his support and he with ours. In the Birmingham Ladywood constituency, we're going to wipe Labour in the West Midlands in the parliamentary election. So, Sir Keir, you can score off your list all those West Midlands Labour MPs that you thought were going to be a part of the majority you were already enjoying before the chickens had hatched. We'll be talking, of course, about the British general election throughout the show, about the local elections on Thursday. Other than my own electoral victories, no election result has ever given me more happiness than the one that Shahbaz Sarwar won in Manchester. Why? Not just because I'm very close to this family, not just because Longsight, the ward in question, is very dear to me. It's where I go in Manchester, the real capital city of England, the cock of the north. It's where I eat, it's where I shop, it's where most of my friends are. Not just because our candidate is a truly magnificent, unflappable, strong figure, the sort of fellow that if you had to go tiger shooting, you'd want him beside you with his gun. You'd know he wouldn't turn it on you. You'd know he wouldn't turn and run when the tiger came. But mainly because he defeated the deputy leader of the Manchester City Council himself. Labour moved heaven and earth through the kitchen sink at our campaign, even the toilet bowl, especially the toilet bowl. I wouldn't like to stoop to describing the kind of foul tactics that they employed, because this was a very big man we were fighting, a man that's been there for decades, a man that's central to the Labour dictatorship in the town hall in the great city of Manchester, and we beat him. In the most epic election ever fought in local government, ever, anywhere, we defeated the deputy leader of Manchester City Council. Now turning to, if you like, bigger things, though these things are big. The question of whether or not there is going to be a ceasefire before the invasion of Rafah is a moot point, because the invasion of Rafah has already begun. The endless day and night bombardment of a tent city has already slaughtered hundreds of people, most of them women and children. 1.6 million people living in tents on which Israel is dropping incendiary bombs to set the tents on fire. This has the potential to be the greatest war crime since the Second World War, and worse than many of the war crimes that we still shudder about today when we think of, watch, or read about the Second World War. This is a Holocaust. If you set fire to 1.6 million people, most of them women and children, what are you other than a Nazi? This has to be said. Israel is behaving not just like an occupying power. And we in Britain, you in America, you in France, in Belgium, in the Netherlands, in Germany, in Italy, you've all been occupying powers. We have all committed terrible crimes as an occupying power. But nobody, at least not in the modern age, has systematically sought to physically annihilate millions of people who are already prisoners. Not since the gas chambers of Auschwitz, not since the Holocaust of the 1940s have we seen such an effort to wipe off the map millions of people solely because they are indigenous people to the land on which they are being slaughtered. And foreigners from Europe and North America have come to take their place. I told you it's going to be a bumpy night. Fasten your seatbelts. It's the mother of all talk shows.